Thank you. My name is Amanda Hacking. I am a coastal scientist with the Washington State Department of Ecology. I'm going to be talking about bluff erosion and sediment transport at South Beach on San Juan Island. Next slide. So I'll start a bit with the background of the area and why the site was chosen, show you the methods we used to collect the data, and then get into what we found and what that may mean for the area. Next slide. So on the left here is an outline of Western Washington, showing Puget Sound and extending up to Canada and Vancouver Island. At the north end of Puget Sound are the San Juan Islands, a mostly rocky archipelago. And then down on the south end of San Juan Island itself is the San Juan Island National Historical Park. So very close to the previous talks, but on the other side of the peninsula, if you will. Next slide, please. So South Beach, our area of interest, is located almost entirely within the San Juan Island National Historical Park, but also extends outside the park to the east into both state and federal conservation lands. This box here is the area that I'm going to be focusing on from the Bluff Trail, the Coastal Bluff Trail, almost all the way over to Kettle Point. A few important things to notice about the setting here are that the beach is bounded alongside to the east and west by rocky outcrops. It is exposed to the high wave and current action of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it makes up an entire drift cell. A drift cell is an area of the shoreline in which there is a single net direction of sediment transport. In this case, the drift is from west to east or left to right. Next slide. South Beach is backed by what's called a feeder bluff. This bluff is about 75 to 150 feet tall and is made up of post-glaciation marine deposits overlain on bedrock. Within this drift cell, the bluffs are the main source of sediment to the beach. Basically, the bluffs feed, thus the name, sand, gravel, and boulders onto the beach, and wind and wave action from the strait moves that sediment around to shape the beach as we see it. Feeder bluffs are common around Puget Sound. This project was part of a larger multi-year project to map feeder bluffs over time to determine how much sediment they supply to their beaches and how that sediment moves once it's on the beach. Next slide, please. This process of bluffs feeding sediment to the beach is also called erosion. That can be a scary word if you've got property above the bluffs, but it's an entirely natural and ecologically important process. Without constant new sediment, beaches become lower and coarser, which makes them less resilient and also removes critical habitat for fish spawning, which requires very strict beach sediment conditions. Next slide. Knowing what's happening to the bluff is essential to predicting what happens above and below it. As an example of the former, see here a map of the Kettle Point Road realignment, which moves the main road to the entire southeast end of the island inland to avoid the risk of eroding bluffs. You can see this white dashed line is where the road existed, and right near the boundary to the park, it was extremely close to the top of the bluff. This work was completed in 2016, the same year as our first survey. We were not involved with that project. I use it here as an example of the bluff's exceptional activity, which was a factor in choosing it as a study site. Next slide, please. So how do we map steep bluffs? By boat and by land. So the main technologies are GPS and lidar. GPS is exactly like the location function on your phone, but we set up extra equipment and also post-process the information afterwards to get the accuracy down to centimeters or inches rather than what side of the road you're on. You can see on the right, Kettle Point Lighthouse and our base station set up with a GPS and radio antenna. And then we walk around on the beach with GPS backpacks to collect more data. Next slide. LIDAR stands for light, distance, and ranging. A laser scanner mounted on our boat, this yellow box on the left, fires invisible lasers at the shoreline, measures when the light from each laser pulse gets back to the scanner, kind of like a visual echo, and does a lot of math to figure out where the thing it bounced off of is in relation to itself. And it can do this thousands of times in a second. As we drive the boat along the shoreline, in the photo on the right, it scans up and down, and we end up with a high-resolution georeferenced point cloud of the bluffs and beach. Our wonderful shore team sets up calibration targets like this one you can see in the foreground, and they also fill in any shadows or gaps that the laser can't see. So we do this once, and you get a map of the shoreline, and if you do it twice, you can compare the two data sets to see how the beach and bluff changed over time. Next slide, please. So this is a digital elevation model of our entire survey from 2021. You can see we mapped farther to the west than I will be talking about today, and also further to the east, all the way to Cattle Point and up into this bay. At this scale, the 2016 dataset looks pretty much identical, so I'll save you the eye strain and simply show you the calculated difference between them on the next slide. So this map is split into the two ends of the survey. The panel on the top is the west end, and the lower panel is the east end. Cattle Point Lighthouse itself is down in the lower right-hand corner. For areas colored blue, the 2021 dataset is higher, and in red areas, the 2021 dataset is lower. Anywhere that's white in this image had no change or small enough change that we deemed it inconsequential. So what can we see? I'll zoom in a second, but it's good to get the overview before we dive in too close. So right away, we can see there's a lot going on the bluff, all this red, heavy, dark red color on the bluffs. It's clearly eroded, but patterns are a little chaotic, so to make out at the scale, so we'll wait on that. What we can see, however, is a pattern on the beach. So far at the west end in this top panel, that red blob on the west end near the arrow for what we called in this report main beach, which I said before is the updrift side of this drift cell, there is a lowering on the beach, that red hotspot. It's diffuse, but with wave action on the beach, that's to be expected. And then on the east end or downdrift side, in the lower map on the right side of that arrow denoting the main beach, is a blue blob where the beach surface has been raised. This is an expected pattern based on what we know of alongshore drift. So waves scour the updrift end and push sediment to the downdrift end, where it runs into these rocky outcrops and accumulates and piles up. Next slide, please. So zooming into the bluffs, we can see a few things. The color scale here is the same as before. Keep in mind that what we're seeing is lowering of the bluff, which is an odd way to think about it. We'll look at it horizontally in a second. But what we can see here are sort of several different regimes of change. On the far west side, there's not much going on at all, and I cut this off because really we didn't see much change on those bluffs at all. In the center area, we see quite a bit of change, but in an odd pattern that's pretty difficult to place. And then on the east side, we can actually see this really cool pattern. So most of the erosion is located along the lower half of the bluff. Some places it extends up to the bluff top, but in others, there's actually this unchanged area at the top, this white area. In addition, this section also has talus accumulations at the toe, which are these small blue dots. It's smaller than is optimal, but you can see small blue dots there. Oh dear. Okay. Of talus accumulations at the base of the bluff. Next slide. This is a photo example. The top is from 2016 and the bottom is from 2021 of the exact same area. And you can see that it went from a fairly uniform sandy gravel vegetated bluff to this cool scarp pattern with sand below it. Next slide, please. So this is the same area, just very slightly shifted, but showing the data set on the bottom, and this is horizontal change. So the yellow is change that has happened into the bluff, and you can see that matches the scarp pattern in the photo, as well as the talus deposits at the bluff toe. Next slide, please. So now that we've identified that sort of pattern, let's zoom out again. And look at these two bluffs and the characteristics and why they might be different. So the left, the vertical bluffs on the middle or west side are actually much steeper, which, given all other factors, would generally mean it's more prone to erosion, but it's not. So let's get some numbers. Next slide. So this table is averages across the extent that we classified as the vertical bluff. You can see the difference in the bluff, slope, and then volume change alongside per alongshore meter, and then the bluff retreat rate average over the entire bluff. And just you can see the sloping bluff is much higher than the vertical bluff. Next slide, please. So we look further at the geology. So this is the surface geology of the area. There's a lot going on, but this big pink blob is marine outwash. And then what's important is this tiny little gray sliver right above where it says vertical bluff that is marine diamicton, which is contains a lot more mud and holds itself together better, making a more vertical surface. Next slide. And you can see that that outline of marine diamicton matches fairly well with our pattern of change. Next slide. So in conclusion, I'd like to emphasize South Beach had a net loss of, that number is incorrect, sorry, it's over 26,000 cubic meters of sediment. We linked, saw a good pattern between bluff erosion and the geology. This is a relatively simple example. Many bluffs around the area have far more complex geologic layers, but this is a good example to start linking those factors, and then multiple surveys could determine more of what is going on at different timescales in a sort of episodic or chronic state. Next slide, please. I would like to acknowledge my co-authors and colleagues and the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program for funding this project. Thank you.
Wonderful job, Amanda. Way to bring it in at the end there. Sorry, I didn't mean to. For all the speakers, I don't mean to harass you. Just letting you know what the time is. But we actually do have a couple of minutes for questions. So if anyone has a question for Amanda, I see Ian Miller already queued up. And then also, if we don't get to all the questions, we do have time in the breakout group also. And that's probably when I'll ask my question. I'll defer to Dr. Miller. Go ahead, Ian.
Well, maybe mine will be quick. I'm just wanting to see if you can hand wave about the loss term, like, you know, sources of loss. Where do you think that 24,000, I'm assuming, I don't know if it's cubic yards or cubic meters.
It was cubic meters.
Is ending up.
I would assume it's ending up offshore. With the shoreline change there, I don't know how much of it would make it around the corner. It'd be interesting, I think, to do a bathymetric survey off of there to see what the seafloor looks like in the area. There's a lot of rocks and kelp, so I assume it's mostly rocky out there, but there could be some sand deposits down there as well, but there's pretty strong currents, so I'm not sure.
Sweet. We've got one more minute, and so I'm just going to ask my question real quickly. So, which is, you showed areas of aggradation and degradation along the linear portion of the actual beach as opposed to the bluff, if I read that correctly. But that was done during a particular season, correct? So do you see seasonal changes, or what are your thoughts on seasonal changes? Because I know on the outer coast, we see quite marked seasonal changes in how sediment gets distributed and taken away.
Yeah, so both of these surveys were taken in the same month, actually, just 5 years apart. So I don't believe that we saw much seasonal change. It could be possible. Of course, you know, things happen differently over each year. So it's possible. That would be another, as I was saying at the end, it'd be good to get in and see more different time scales. You know, this was a block of 5 years, so a lot can happen, and whether that is seasonal or really episodic or just slow and ongoing, we can't really tell from the data sets that we have.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll probably ask you a couple more questions during the breakout session.
Awesome.
So, but at this point, I'd like to thank Amanda.